Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Aaron.
Yes, you are. And I'm Damien. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want interdependent study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Damien, you are up this week.
Yes.
What do you bring to the table today?
I am so excited, my friend, because I have brought our second piece from the latest edition of Hammer and Hope to the table for us. The piece is called The Punishment System and Fascism Go Hand in Hand. It was written by Rachel Herzing, Amelia Kirby, and Jack Norton, who are all in some way, shape, or form abolitionist organizers and scholars. And they're also members of what's called the Institute for Abolitionist Accompaniment. And this was a really incredible piece, which obviously was probably to be expected since it's from Hammer and Hope.
Yeah.
But this piece is a really great analysis about the dangers of fascism here in the United States, and specifically how fascism is supported by the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex. And there's also an analysis of the impact of that fascism on all of us as individuals and on our society, and certainly on abolitionist organizers and their work in fighting fascism as well. So one of the powerful things I think that Rachel, Amelia, and Jack offer in this piece is this warning, which I thought might be a great place for us to launch into our conversation about this piece. They say, quote, "Without a solid understanding of the violence of the prison industrial complex, activists and organizers may not be adequately prepared for infiltration, disruption, harassment, arrest, or imprisonment as a result of contact with the punishment system. Without a strong analysis of that system, people feeling an urgent need to crush fascism may find themselves reaching for instruments of state repression, such as cheering for the imprisonment of January 6 rioters, nearly 1/5 of whom worked as police or military personnel. We need analyses of fascism and anti-fascist politics that can adequately account for the ways both the rioters and the system designed to contain them may be expressions of a fascist movement." So I thought that was a really great place maybe to launch us. And so I wanted to bring that here. But I'm very excited about this one. I've been looking forward to getting into this conversation with you, my friend. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I thought this was a great article that I think is trying to expand our collective understanding of fascism beyond the typical historical figures of Mussolini and Franco and Hitler and all of the evil like men that we think about when we think about fascism.
Yes.
To really expanding beyond that and thinking about the other ways that fascism works and operates.
So it shows up, right?
Yeah. They say early in the article, quote, "Fascism may arrive through a strong man with supporters from the military, but it also pervades the machinery of liberal democracy." And they use some very clear examples of how fascist-style policies have been implemented over the last few years, like the anti-trans bills that are everywhere,
Yes.
criminalization of protest, which is in a lot of places, the actions of Border Patrol over the last several years and how they handle refugees and asylum seekers, the family separation policies, all of those things. And they make the point that the way that Black people and other marginalized peoples have been oppressed in the United States is its own kind of fascism. And they do this by paraphrasing Angela Davis. They say, quote, "Surveillance and repression of the racialized and radicalized is a kind of incipient fascism." And as you said, without having a strong analysis of the punishment system in the U.S., we can continue to accept fascism in the U.S. with a veneer of our so-called free democratic republic shining on top as though it's not the incipient fascism, as Angela Davis calls it.
Absolutely. I mean, any reference to the great Angela Davis is as a powerful one. But that's one of the big things I appreciate about this piece, and you sort of nailed it on the head, that it's not these figureheads throughout our history. I mean, it is, but it's more than that. It's morphed to be more than that. And I think those were all really great examples. The anti-trans bill, especially that criminalization of protest. And we've had some pieces about that here. All of that is fascism, and the creep of fascism has gotten worse and worse. And it's so pervasive throughout the United States. I'm not surprised by the existence of fascism here in the United States by any means, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the things for me that's been so troubling to grapple with these past few years is just how prevalent and powerful fascism has become, right? And we've talked about this before in some of the other pieces that we've read, but like this creep of fascism has really gotten out of control, I think. And Rachel, Amelia, and Jack offer some really great analysis about all of this in this piece. They say, quote, "Fascism can flourish within a liberal democracy. The legacy of Jim Crow as a states' rights issue is not such a distant history. Critical race theory bans, attempts to roll back limited defunding of police budgets, and quashing the victories of tenant organizing echo the revanchism of the capitalist state in crisis. Prioritizing stability over liberatory transformation facilitates fascism's taking root in everyday life. It may also discourage people from the active participation in civic life on which democracy depends. Well-intentioned reformers who ignore abolitionist organizers in order to make minor adjustments to the current punishment system strengthen the forces of incipient fascism." And to me, that's a really powerful statement and analysis and honestly warning to all of us, particularly that last piece that, people are scared to take action against this, right?
Yeah, because there's so much built into, we talked about the criminalization of protest. We talked about it before. We mentioned it just now. There's a lot of ways that the response to these things gets criminalized, gets punished.
Yes.
It's all designed to, keep us afraid of responding and afraid of what we might lose from responding. So,
right.
Yeah, it's really scary. And I think that's how abolitionists come into play for this, how abolition as a concept comes into play, because they make a lot of great points about what abolitionist organizers have to offer to anti-fascist organizing.
Yeah.
They say, quote, "It is essential that anti-fascist strategy include organizers who have sustained experience in abolitionist campaigns. Such organizers can contribute more than tactical assistance in managing confrontations with the cops, offering jail and court support, and enabling bail funds. They also can offer a grounded analysis developed from sustained practice to help anti-fascists develop strategy and diminish the harms of the enforcement arm of the fascist agenda. They will guard against the sort of law and order and rule of law politics that liberal democracy suggests is our best defense against fascism."
Yeah, that's huge.
And so I think to bring back to the point I was trying to make before the quote is that the abolitionist and abolition as a concept helps us recognize that the police are enforcing this on us in a lot of ways, right? Like the police are the enforcement arm of a fascist government.
Absolutely.
That's what happens. So holding on to abolitionist values and a vision while doing anti-fascist work helps us all have a long-term vision that curtails more fascist behavior in the future.
Yes.
And so it's not just about addressing whatever is happening right now, but it's also recognizing what created the conditions for this to happen now. So it's not just about going back to normal, because the normal we've been living in got us here.
Right. Absolutely. One, I love your point there, and particularly the praise for abolitionist organizers and abolition as a strategy. But abolition organizers will help keep that path clear for us and not accept any sort of solution that continues to rely on or is in alignment with the criminal punishment system or the prison industrial complex. Absolutely. Yeah. That's some great analysis in this piece. Another big part of this that stood out to me is actually is so connected to what you just talked about, what I talked about a little bit ago. And it's, the importance behind why we can't stay stagnant or accept the status quo, because that only gives fascism the room it needs to grow and to flourish. And so one of the things I appreciated was how they acknowledged all of the crises, all of the awful things. We talked last week about the unprecedented times we continue to experience and live through. So they say, quote, "These are times of widespread suffering and many interlocking crises. efforts to expand policing and imprisonment by appealing to their purported ability to provide everything from healing and treatment to racial and social justice serve only to reinforce the hold the punishment system has over all of our lives. And we've talked about this before, but nothing about the prison industrial complex is designed to keep us safe, right? And we have to be weary of any kind of intervention or solution that is rooted in an expansion or an investment in those systems, because at the end of the day, they're harmful systems that at their core don't have people, communities, us, and our health, our well-being, our freedom, our liberation in mind, and certainly at the core of their work.
Yeah, it's not about the people.
No.
Right. So I think that's a key point in all of this. And so another point that the authors have here is about how the punishment system is a channel for fascism to take root, because it doesn't have our liberation, our well-being, our health, our freedom in mind.
Yeah.
So they say, quote, while not all activity funneled through the punishment system is fascistic, fascism cannot take hold without the coercive force of the punishment system.
Yes.
Countering fascism in the U.S. requires paying attention to the ways that the state integrates the violence of the prison industrial complex into daily life, and how fascist forces employ the punishment system as their enforcing arm. And one of the important points to me here is how, when we accept the violence of the punishment system, we accept control and violence as part of our society.
Yes.
Which is all part of a hierarchy.
Yes.
And that is part of fascism. The strict hierarchy is a piece of fascism.
Yes.
And so the hierarchy gives fascists space to accept, or to encourage other people, to encourage sort of general populace to accept that some people are better than others, and therefore it's okay to exclude them, and then to reinforce that hierarchy with violence in whatever form or fashion it is.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I saw somebody's analysis about how they're predicting mass deportations will occur is that they will go after people with criminal records first.
Yep.
They'll say, oh, these are dangerous people, because it's hard to defend that they should stay here. It feels like a reasonable thing to most people because we've accepted the criminal punishment system.
There it is.
As our guide for what safety is.
Yeah.
And so this becomes a safety measure. And so, yeah, sure, we'll get rid of them. But that's just a test balloon, so to speak. And then they will move on to other groups of people from there that are slightly less acceptable than, say, people with a criminal record to the general population. And it'll move on from there. And so it's a reinforcement of hierarchy, and it's using groups and then expanding beyond that to other groups. And so that's somebody's prediction of how they think that mass incarcerations will happen.
Mass deportations.
Mass deportations will happen.
Yeah.
Under the new Trump administration.
That's really scary to think about. And I think it's accurate because this is embedded in us and it's embedded in our society. And so that's a logical step, I think, to think what would come next. That's a targeted group that, using this sarcastic, we can all accept that this group of folks who have a criminal record, sure, they should be first in line. But then where does that stop?
First in line.
First in line.
That's what
there
you said.
Is.
It's first in line. The line is bigger than the people who are first in line.
Absolutely.
And it continues beyond that.
And who gets to decide then who's second and third in line, and what is the rationale that they use? And I think that is really scary to think about, and how those lines get drawn.
Yeah. One, how much to, I know that this is, we're jumping into a different topic, so to speak.
Yeah.
But how much the criminal punishment system, the prison industrial complex, plays a huge role in what mass deportations might become.
Yes.
People have to be detained.
Yes.
So all
what
of
does
this
that look
stuff
like? How are folks treated?
Geared up by the criminal or the prison industrial complex and private prisons, and all of that will play a huge role in in that if that comes to pass.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like we're talking a little bit about application. We're talking a little bit about what could be. So which is again so scary, but let's turn our conversation to analysis, because I also think there's so much brilliant insight and analysis in this piece. So let's get it back to it, and certainly lots of application from it. So how does this piece and our conversation about it apply to our everyday lives and work? My application actually comes from the closing of this piece. So Rachel, Amelia, and Jack share this, quote, "Prison industrial complex abolitionist organizers will not miraculously light the path forward for anti-fascist organizing. But if we do not remain focused on the prison industrial complex in the context of a growing fascist threat, we risk missing the forest for the trees. Abolitionist organizers are essential to the long struggle ahead against the prison industrial complex and fascism, which, as history and everyday life teach us, go hand in hand."
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much about that was amazing. You know, for me, it was the forest trees analogy that got me. But I think this was a really huge takeaway from this piece and a really brilliant way to close the piece. But we've got to keep the prison industrial complex and its role in supporting and buoying fascism in mind as we work to fight it and dismantle the prison industrial complex, and certainly to get rid of and dismantle fascism.
Yeah, I think that's the application for me was that part, and how much the criminal punishment system creates space for fascism to take root in our society. There's so much connection between punishment and fascism that the authors lay bare here, and that line of thinking, as we've talked about here on the episode so far, helps us unpack more about how to resist fascism and perhaps keep it from taking root again in the future. Because if you're in a liberal democracy with the sheen, the veneer of liberal democracy, but it's actually got some fascist roots, some structure underneath it's fascist, it's going to return.
Absolutely.
And return.
Right.
So you've got to figure out what's causing things to come back to this place where we accept these fascist ideas and policies.
Absolutely. And how do we dig the root up?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about homework. How do we want to continue our learning and unlearning work once we leave this here table of ours? I am intrigued by the fact that the authors, who again are in some way, shape, or form abolitionist organizers and scholars, they're also members of the Institute for Abolitionist Accompaniment, as I mentioned at the start. And so I'd love to learn more about the work of the Institute. I wasn't able to put that together in my mind, and wasn't able to spend any time Googling what that was or who else are members of this group. And so I would just love to learn more about it. The piece, as you brought, also references Angela Davis's autobiography from 1974, and I really, really, really need to read that. I have mentioned that many times, and it keeps coming up, and I'm ashamed that I haven't read it yet. So I need to make that a priority. So that's my homework. What about you?
Yeah, let's read that autobiography soon. We got the newest edition of it that was published by Haymarket in the last few years.
It's sitting there.
we should really read it soon.
Okay.
Maybe at the beginning of the new year.
Yes. We were just talking about what could we bring in the new year. So, yeah.
All right. Well, my homework is another article in addition to the Angela Davis autobiography.
Okay.
My homework is another article that is linked in this one called The Carceral Conjuncture in Central Appalachia, which is about how much the criminal punishment system has really laid down roots in Appalachia, as there are 16 state and federal prisons located there. And they reference that, and the authors reference that in this article, and with a link to this article that I'm thinking about for homework. And they talk about how these prisons are used as so-called economic drivers for local residents.
Wow.
In this article, they talk about how there's a new prison that is gigantic in a county in eastern Kentucky that the county leases beds to the state. And so that drives revenue for the county.
Wow.
So there's all of these ways that prisons are being used to generate revenue for local governments, or for used as economic drivers.
Yes.
And I think this article dives into some of that and the ways that that's happening in Appalachia.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that would be a great piece to read. Absolutely. Yeah. So again, this was a really great piece, which was to be expected, given where we found it. But we definitely encourage folks to check it out. And again, there was so much. I loved your opening part about, what fascism has become, right? What it was, what we may think of it as, but what it is now, how it has evolved, how it has taken root. And so there was a lot that I learned in this piece that I'm really grateful for. So glad we were able to talk about it this week.
Yeah.
But looking ahead to next week, you're up next time. What are you going to bring to the table in our next episode?
Well, speaking of Angela Davis,
okay,
I'm going to bring a book of hers called Abolition Democracy Beyond Empire, Prisons, and Torture.
Okay.
It features 4 essays/interviews that are titled Politics in Prisons, Sexual Coercion, Prisons, and Feminist Responses, Abolition Democracy, and finally, Resistance, Language, and Law. I've read a very, very little bit of it so far, but I'm looking forward to diving into it in detail here next week and having some good conversations about what we're learning from Angela Davis.
Angela Davis, there it is. I'm looking forward to reading that. Thanks for bringing that to the table. And any chance to read Angela Davis, we're all for it here. All right, well, that's all we got for you this week. We want to thank you for joining us today. You know what we want you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life, follow us on social media, including Instagram and TikTok. Check us out over on YouTube, and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.